Now, what I would like to talk to you tonight about is based on the text from Luke chapter 22, verses 41 through 46. Here Jesus is with his disciples following the Last Supper, and they had gone up to the Mount of Olives. And he withdrew from his disciples about a stone's throw and knelt and prayed. And the scriptures say this in verse 42, "Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done." And there appeared to him an angel from heaven, strengthening him. And being in agony, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground. Now you can see the picture here. This is the night when Jesus was betrayed. He was going to be facing the crucifixion early the next morning. And he is in agony over what's about to happen. There was a time when I was a freshman in college when I had a crisis of faith, I would call it. I had been raised Christian. There was not a time that I can ever remember where I didn't know God and believe in him. And honestly, for the most part, felt as if God were my best friend. But I reached a point where it was very difficult for me to believe he really cared about me. And I was arguing with him, and I was saying things that even today I shudder to think that I said. I know that God can handle it. He's a big God. And it was something that I needed to go through, because God really did teach me a great deal that day as I fought with him. I told him how life felt unfair, and that I was angry with him because he was in control, and he hadn't done things to stop me from hurting. I felt like he had something against me. I even looked to Jesus and said things like, what was the big sacrifice you made anyway, Jesus? I mean, you knew that you were going to be raised from the dead. And people have died worse deaths than being hanged on a tree, nailed to a cross. There are people who have suffered worse deaths. And I opened up my Bible, and I opened it up to this passage. And it just struck me, the agony that Jesus was in. And I wondered what the big deal was. Why so stressed out? Hadn't many people died torturous deaths before? Why was his so torturous that he would sweat blood? I continued to read concerning the crucifixion, jumping around from one gospel to another. It was when I got to Matthew and read the words, my God, why have you forsaken me?" that I put these two portions of Scripture together. I then knew why Jesus had sweat blood that night before. He was forsaken by God. The Scriptures tell us that Jesus took all of our sin into his body. He had become sin. The one who knew no sin had become sin for us. He had become sin for me. And all those angry words that I had just yelled at God, they were on Jesus that night. They were on Jesus that next morning as he was nailed to the tree. He was suffering because of my sin. And he knew that he was to be forsaken by God the Father. You know that God has never forsaken anyone except for his own Son. It's Jesus alone that was forsaken by God. Forsaken for you and for me. Oftentimes we get angry with God and frustrated because things are not happening the way that we think that they should. And we feel like we've been forsaken by God, but we have not. Jesus knew what was going to happen on that Friday. And he was not sweating blood because of fear of nails in his hands or in his feet, or the fear of a crown of thorns on his brow. He wasn't sweating blood because he was fearful of the mob yelling at him obscenities and jeering at him, and people who call themselves religious slapping him in the face and spitting on him. No, that's not why he sweat blood. He sweat blood because he alone was to be forsaken by God, because he had taken on our sin.